Welcome back to the channel, my wonderful human beings. I've had a little bit of a break from YouTube, much needed. It's quite difficult to make YouTube videos, don't know if you were aware. But anywho, I'm back and I am going to be hitting you with a video that I'm going to call Debunking Christian Myths. Because why not? So today we're going to be covering a couple of Christian common ideologies, I suppose, that actually are myths in a historical / scholarly sense. So we're going to go through a bunch of stuff. I also am going to have like literary citations for all of this, and I hope you enjoy it. So yeah. Cue the music. Alright, so today's episode is going to be focused on the New Testament, which is where the Abrahamic religions and Christianity kind of split in two. And just for those of you that maybe have no context of what Christianity actually began with, a lot of people have an idea of maybe what a modern day Christian or Christianity today looks like, but aren't really sure sort of what it was intended to be. It's all focused around Jesus Christ, who was a Jewish man, and that's where we're going to begin, is actually talking about Jesus Christ himself. So the first myth that we are debunking today is that Jesus was not white, like at all. He was a very brown man. Jesus was a Jewish man, and he would have looked like a Jewish individual in this first century period. So the reason we have this idea of this like white man with like long hair and a beard is because of the Renaissance artwork period, and some other reasons. Also, you know, the modern Christianity or Catholicism in general really took hold in about 300 CE in the Byzantine era, and then sort of spread through Europe from there. And yeah, well, they obviously just didn't, I don't know, think much of it. So we have this, the Renaissance art, a depiction by like Karl Bloch of the Sermon on the Mount, where he's wearing these robes and, you know, he's white. But yeah, facts are is that he was not pale-skinned. He potentially did have brown hair and a beard though, but there's even been depictions of Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes. Not accurate. Essentially, the painters in Renaissance era would have just modeled him off of particular standards of the time. And that's why we have this, you know, white Jesus movement, I guess. Another really interesting example of this is before the year 400 CE, Jesus was often depicted as a clean-shaven individual. And then after this point, he has a beard. So it's just like left to the artist's interpretation, I suppose. In the 20th century, there was a fresco discovered that was dated from 235 CE, which was known as the healing of the paralytic, which is a miracle Jesus was said to have performed, and he had short hair and no beard. So this early depiction was, you know, even 200 years after his death. So even this is, you know, if we think about our context on what 200 years ago, we probably don't know a whole lot. You get what I'm trying to say here? Then as colonization took place and Christianity was a tool that was used with colonization, the European colonialism ideologies of Christ being white just carried along with it. But according to scientists and anthropologists, obviously he was not white. Developments in forensic anthropology have allowed researchers to better get a better idea of what he probably would have looked like. Now, the way that they did this was they had an Israeli skull that dated back to the 1st century. So with other different factors, they took this skull and used a computer program, clay, and the knowledge that they have on the historical Jewish Middle Eastern features to create a face that more like is a hypothetical face, but would be much more accurate to what he potentially looked like than the artists that we are probably familiar with if you grew up as a Christian. It isn't the face of Jesus because we don't have his actual remains to, build on. But it is a departure point for considering what Jesus would have looked like. And so I'm going to put the construction of a 1st century man from Judea on the screen. And again, this is based off an actual Judean skull. So now as you can see, the forensic reconstruction looks literally nothing like he is depicted in European art, like at all. But he would have been, tanned olive skin, dark curly hair cropped close to his head, and a short beard, because you got to remember this was like Judea. This was like a hot climate, right? Hot, dusty climate. And most men in the 1st century shaved their faces. So it is possible that Jesus may have worn a beard, but it's also very much still possible that he was more cleanly shaven, again, just due to cultural standards at the time. And like, I just think heat is like probably the biggest one, but he was on a ministry, like he was on the road. So he probably didn't have a whole lot of time to like, cut his hair off. Another really interesting random, I guess, topic is his height. At this point in time, the median and I think average height of a male in this area would have been 5'5". So I think I'm 5'5". And then another comment made by archaeologists, Taylor, he says, Joan Taylor, sorry. She says, I think what you would recognize Jesus as being is just really someone who looked very poor. He was not rich, he was poor. He came from a poor family. So there is a second photorealistic depiction of Jesus by artist Bas Utovrik, I think is how you pronounce it, which I'll pop here. Again, very plausible. Same kind of idea, shorter hair, shorter beard, Middle Eastern looking, and a Jew. Jesus was a Jew, okay? So, that is the first myth debunked. The second myth debunked is that Jesus wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew. Jesus was a Jewish man. He practiced Jewish law, and he was essentially his mission was trying to get the Pharisees and the Sadducees the Pharisees of the time in the Jewish community to relax a little bit on the Jewish customs. That was what his whole mission was about, is coming back saying, wait a second, are we not supposed to be loving one another? Is that not more important than keeping all the rules, checking all the boxes? And I personally find that very ironic, because a lot of, you know, you look through the medieval societies and the check boxes, right? It's kind of just like almost the opposite of what his mission really was. Now, a couple of other quick facts are that at this point in time, for a Jewish male to be on a religious ministry, he would have had to have been married. So that is something that would have been a thing. Yeah, hey, while we're on the topic of what people looked like, let's talk about what the Virgin Mary actually would have looked like. Depictions that you're probably used to seeing are of a fair white lady with like a blue headdress on, I don't know, something like that. Majority of the time it's a white lady on a donkey, you know what I'm saying? But this would not have been the case. Obviously nobody actually really knows what she looked like, but what we do know is the cultural context of what women from Nazareth would have looked like, the customs, the appearance, and all of that sort of thing. First things first, Mary was a woman of Nazareth. She would have had darker skin, not because of her beautiful pigmentation, but because she would have spent all of her days outside, okay, doing stuff, because you gotta work. We gotta work for a living, you know what I mean? Literally, we gotta work to live. So yeah, she would have been not only darker skinned, but also extremely like sun kissed. I don't know. Now, she would have had her fingertips, probably up to the middle, dyed with red henna. So henna is like a temporary sort of, I guess, tattoo, a substance that's used to dye the skin. And yeah, it was customary for Nazarene women to have their fingers and toes dyed red. She would not have had a white dress. She would have been dressed in the tribal dress of her family's colors. So, potentially reds, yellows, that sort of thing. She would have looked nomadic in her appearance. She would have not worn a veil, like, you know, those like Renaissance-esque veils. No. But she would have worn sort of like a hair wrap. When she prayed, she would have worn a veil. But then as she traveled, she, yeah, would have worn a hairnet or a hair wrap. So she also would have had nose ring. A nose ring was extremely popular. I don't think it was customary at the time, and she would have had earrings. And yeah, she would have been Middle Eastern looking. So let me show you a couple of different artist impressions. I'll pop them up here on the screen. I personally love this one. I think she just looks so badass. Personally, that's, you know. Here's another depiction. Love. I can relate to this so much more, in my opinion. Let me like just show sort of like a Renaissance comparison between the two. You see what I'm saying? You know? Also, like, I mean, personally, coming from a Christian sect that, like, you weren't allowed to get, like, any piercings other than, like, one earring, to know that, like, literally the Mother Mary had a nose ring. You're not allowed to get tattoos. She literally had tattoo hands, and anyway, you get the point. So that is my second fact. Let's move on. So I really want to talk about Mary the Magdalene. So it is very commonly thought that Mary Magdalene was the woman who was brought in the act of adultery and stoned. Incorrect. Absolutely made up by some random pope. Not correct. Some random pope was like, oh yeah, all the Marys in the New Testament are just the same. They weren't. The second, more like viable, I suppose, idea was that Magdalene was Mary from Magdalene. Now, there is not one first century piece of evidence that suggests that Magdalene was a place in the first century. Is it a place today? Yes. But in the first century, no. So there is a literary review that was only published in 2021, last year, from this video. And it was done by Elizabeth Schrader and Joni Taylor. And it goes through the literary evidence of Magdalene, or the meaning of Magdalene, and it concludes that Mary the Magdalene meaning the tower or the highest one, was actually Jesus's disciple or closest disciple. Now, we also have the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is in tatters. We only have bits and pieces, but in essence it's a post-resurrection story of the fact that Jesus came to Mary Magdalene first, and the apostles were all like mad about that, and she was like, look guys, this is what we have to do, and Paul was like, stuff you, you're a lady, I'm not listening to you, and then goes off and does his own thing, right? So then the plot thickens, right? So there's this this train of belief that obviously Jesus would have had to have been married, and so it is theorized that Mary Magdalene could very much have been his wife, and that they very much could have had children. Now, when Jesus was capitally punished by the Roman rule, and by his own people, might I also add, at their discretion, pretty much, they forced Pilate's hand. All of his followers were also being persecuted, and to put it into context, Christianity was not legal to practice in the Roman Empire. Like, if we skip forward a few years, Emperor Nero, when he was ruling, you know what, just ignore the lights, guys, because they're clearly homophobic. Yeah, so when when Emperor Nero was ruling Rome, and Rome was literally like dead ass burning to the ground, and he was just like, it is what it is. Afterwards he was like, oh, it's obviously the Christians' fault, and they just mass burned Christians. So you like could not practice Christianity. You get what I'm trying to say? So when Jesus died, all of his disciples were also killed. The only one that wasn't was it Paul that died of old age? Anyway, point being is that if Jesus's wife was Mary Magdalene, she needed to get her ass out of there ASAP, or otherwise she was probably going to be next on the chopping block. So there are plethoras plethora of stories from the south of France that Mary Magdalene got in a boat. That Mary Magdalene got in a boat and she made her way to the south of France, where they accepted her. Now there is a basilica in the south of France that to this day believes that they have the skull of Mary Magdalene. It wasn't until I think King Louis, after a couple of the Crusades, where he was like, hey, like, let's dig up Mary Magdalene's body. And he goes to Sam's Basilica, and the story goes that he opens it up and it smelt of flowers, and anyway, whatever. The point being is that Mary the Magdalene, the tower, the highest one, very much could have been Christ's #1 apostle. Which leads me into my next topic. There was a female apostle. Now, a lot of sects of Christianity like to try to apologize. They're apologetic about this. They're like, no, no. There was a female apostle, okay? Her name was Junia. And this is all encapsulated in Romans 16 verse 7, okay? Basically, greet Andronicus and Junia, who are outstanding among the apostles, is the verse, okay? Essentially, they're being written to as the apostles of Christ. Again, keep in mind the political environment. Now, for years, it was sort of disregarded that Junia in Greek was a female name and a female name only. But as time has gone on, as people are specializing in this area, there is no doubt that this name is a female name and that Junia was a woman. The best scholar that I've seen express this is Dan Mackalean. He actually has a TikTok. Highly suggest you go follow him. But there is a book by Eldon J. Epp called Junia, the First Woman Apostle. And this book, this book, case is closed. You know what I mean? Like, it's very hard to argue with this. Keep in mind, by the way, like, just a little aside, the English Bible, right? The King James Version and any derivative of that, King James Version, was literally a translated version of a Greek Bible from a man who spoke Aramaic and then was reading Hebrew scripture. That's 4 languages, okay? If you don't believe that there is massive misunderstandings and gaps and nuances within the Bible because of just that fact alone, you are clearly not bilingual. Like, there is major miscommunication, misunderstandings, right? Let alone the fact that we're talking about 2,000 years ago in a very nuanced Roman occupied Middle East, and also in the context of a Orthodox Jewish society. You know what I mean? Like, there's just so much we don't understand as modern readers that's lost to time because the context is completely taken out of. And then people want to argue verses or argue like the word of God based on like one word. It's like, bro, no. Like, if you can't speak Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew, let's not Bible bash. Not to mention the fact that the King James version of the Bible was literally done in secret. Like the translation was from the Greek, was done in secret, and then the guy that translated got killed for translating it into English because it was sacrilegious. And it wasn't until after he died that King James was like, you know what? Yeah, let's actually use that. This is around like, hang on. John Wycliffe, he was the one that undertook the first complete English translation. Now, when translators translate, it's not like when you translate something, it's not word for word, especially when you're translating something like Hebrew is a very symbolic, how do I say this? A very like symbolic, rich language, poetic, rich language. The Greek mentality, or the like Greco-Roman Western mentality, is like, I have 5 stones, right? This, by the way, this is just like me attempting to give a metaphor. Or like, I have 7 stones because I have 7 rocks. That's like Greco-Roman. In like a Hebrew writing, 7 represents a whole, like a complete thing. So like in Hebrew, if it said I have 7 stones, it may mean something completely different than just literally having 7 pebbles. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? So like, you know, John Wycliffe undertook this translation, which was banned, and then, yeah, he got killed. Anyway, and I mean, this is like 1409, right? The Greek Bible at this point has been tinkered with, because suspiciously we don't have, anyway, I could like literally talk about this all day, so I'm gonna like continue moving forward. Scholars that are trained in ancient Greek, Hebrew, biblical scholars. Junia was a woman. She was a woman, and in that reference in Romans 16:7, it says who are outstanding among the apostles. So like the best apostle was a woman, you know what I mean? Why was that erratic? Like, why don't we know this? Well, I mean, that's another video. I think we need to talk about, like, you know, women being embodied as Satan, probably in a whole video of itself. All right, the next myth that I want to debunk is Revelations, okay? 10 things that the book of Revelations is not. It is a symbolic commentary. It is not history. It's also very rich in symbolism, allegories, metaphors, very like kind of odd to the modern reader. Like personally, I have wondered, like, you know, was he high when he wrote this? It's not impossible. The major point is that Revelations is talking about the context of early Christians in the late and first and early second centuries. It is not talking about modern future times. Let that remunerate, okay? The time is near. The images and the symbols that John invokes for the figures and events in the prominent time and place, they are about the Roman occupation at that point in history, not about the end of the world. I know, it's big. At this point in time as well, the early Christians had to use coded communication, right? In this context of Jewish traditions, this made sense to the reader, right? It's not a magical ball, glass ball that, you know, you can look into and it's like got apocalyptic predictions of the future. Yeah. To a lot of Christians, that's probably not surprising. But if you were raised believing that the Bible was very literal, in the sector that I grew up in, that was the case, then that may be somewhat shocking to you. Anyway, moving on to our last topic. Last and final myth is that the Son of God, or Christ being the Son of God, was a unique concept. In the contemporary mome, the Son of God was something that emperors of Rome declared about themselves. Okay? I don't really know if I communicated that properly, but yeah, the son of Caesar declared Caesar turn into a god, and that he was the Son of God, and that he would, you know, sleep in a modest house, sleep on a low bed, and that he wasn't, when he wasn't fasting, he only ate plain food like coarse bread. And anyway, the point is that it was pretty like contemporary for this whole Son of God thing to be talked about, not just in a Christian context, but in, or even a Jewish context, like in a Roman context. Yeah, people were familiar with this. And like, I mean, you can sort of, this sort of takes place is like congruently in the Egyptian world. Pharaohs were seen as a god. They were not just a king or queen in few circumstances. They were a pharaoh, they were a god, they were a deity. And when they died, they then ascended to be with the other deities. So it was not a unique concept. And I think that's important to understand because it just is. Like, you know, informed consent. Anyway, so how many did we get through? That was it. That's all I had to say today. So there's some interesting little myths about the New Testament and the Christian situation. I do want to do one of these on the Old Testament and like debunk some myths on that. Please feel free, if you have scholarly articles or scholars that you want to point people to further. This is just like a very light sort of overview of things. I'll be leaving some citations for all this stuff in the comment section, and I'll also link to some really cool scholars that are pretty active on social media. Yeah, and I just like want to thank you for watching this today. If you could subscribe, I would like literally love that for us. And I'm going to try and get out at least a video a fortnight, so every other week. Love you very much. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. Yeah. Bye, guys.